Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another series dedicated to the Hanbali school and its respective scholars. In this particular video, we're going to be talking about one of the great imams of the madhab from the latter generation, min al-mutaakhirin, by the name of Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, the author of many great works, including Umdatul Talib, which is a text we will be looking at in greater detail. This great scholar and sheikh was known as Abu as-Sa'adat Mansur ibn Yunus ibn Salahuddin ibn Hassan ibn Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Idris al-Buhuti al-Hanbali. Was born in Egypt in the year 1000 of the Hijra calendar. Many of you may be familiar with Buhut. Certainly you're familiar with Egypt. So Buhut is a small village located to the north of Cairo, a very famous city in Egypt, Cairo, and 50 kilometers south of the Mediterranean Sea. So Buhut is kind of it's just off the coast. It's between Port Said, which lies to its east, and Alexandria, which lies to its west. Buhut is a small little village. And so the great Imam Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti is in reference to that particular village. As a student of knowledge, he, rahimahullah ta'ala, dedicated all of his time to the Islamic sciences, especially Islamic law, fiqh. And he learned from many of the great Hanbali scholars and masters, including Sheikh al-Qadi Jamaluddin, also called al-Jamal, Yusuf ibn Ali al-Buhuti. He learned from Yusuf ibn Ali's son, Sheikh Abdurrahman ibn Yusuf al-Buhuti, who passed away in 1040 of the Hijra calendar. Sheikh Abdurrahman was a student of al-Fatuhi, the author of Muntaha al-Iradat. And so if you're familiar with that particular textbook, Muntaha al-Iradat, by Ibn Najjar, then you should get an idea as to the status of this particular teacher, considering Muntaha al-Iradat is like one of the primary reference works of the madhab. It's one of the books which is utilized to determine the official position, the mu'tamad. He also learned from Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Mardawi, who passed away in 1026, who happened to be a student of al-Fatuhi as well, and was known as Sheikh al-Hanabila during his time. And this Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Mardawi played the most profound teaching role in the life of the author Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, rahimahumullah jami'an. Among several others, there was Sheikh Yahya ibn Musa ibn Ahmad al-Hajjawi, also a recognizable name. This was the son of the author of al-Iqna' and Zad al-Mustaqni'. So there we have another textbook, al-Iqna', which is the second of two, Muntaha al-Iradat and al-Iqna', that are considered primary in determining the official canon of the Hanbali school. And how exactly that is done is something that you would learn a little bit later on, but just to have a general idea or concept that there are specific works within the corpus of Islamic literature, of Hanbali literature, that are used to establish the mu'tamad, or the authorized or official position. So there is a methodology to that. It's not something that is willy-nilly of sorts or without rules. There is, and it's quite specific in nature and how that is determined. According to al-Muhibbi, who's a historian, he authored a book called Khulasat al-Athar. He said that Sheikh Mansur ibn Yunus was the Sheikh of the Hanbalis in Egypt and the last of their scholars. He was an ocean of knowledge who spent his time researching religious issues. People would come from all around to consult him. He was the jurisconsult and teacher of the land. He was known to some as a pious saint who abstained from the delights of this world. He was an expert in usul and tafsir of the Quran. And he was known for his generosity too, by the way. So this is a great example of a scholar who has benefited from their knowledge and their study. He was known for his generosity. He would host family and associates from the Maqdisi clan every Friday night. And if one of them fell ill, he would visit them, take them to his own home, and nurse them back to health. So here, this act, you can see, indicates something else, which is the position of the Maqadisa, which were the great scholars from Jerusalem. And we know some of the very famous scholars of the Hanbali school: Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, the great Imam al-Hafiz Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, etc., etc. And so he continuously honored family and friends from that clan and would look after them to the best of his ability. People would also bring their sadaqah to him. They would bring their sadaqah to him to entrust him to discharge of their and distribute their sadaqah, and he would do so by giving it all away to his students, those that were in his gatherings, not taking any of it for himself. He was a man of profound worship and constantly benefiting others and seeking benefit as well. According to Al-Ghazi, who died in 1214, another author and historian, he wrote An-Na'at al-Akmal. He said that Mansur ibn Yunus was a dynamic leader, a scholar of the various sciences, a jurist, a vast ocean of knowledge, a scholar of usul and tafsir, a mountain of knowledge and wisdom, a sea of virtue with mastery in Islamic law, inheritance, and other subjects. He was responsible for instruction and fatwa according to the Hanbali school. Basically, like, he was the end all when it came to teaching and issuing religious edicts and verdicts. According to Ibn Humayd, who authored As-Suhub al-Wabila, and this was a book, this is a book actually dedicated to the biographies. Some of them are very, very brief in nature, of the Hanbali scholars around, this is like, we could consider this like part 3 of 3. One of those books was authored by al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, which is entitled Tabaqat al-Hanabila, and then there is Avail by Ibn Rajab. He basically followed after al-Qadi Abu Ya'la in the timeline, and he authored a book about the Hanbali scholars after al-Qadi's book. And then after, in the timeline of Ibn Rajab's book, then we have this book by Ibn Humayd, known as As-Suhub al-Wabila. Essentially, he says he was the support of the madhab during his time and the primary reference, basically meaning that Sheikh Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, rahimahullah ta'ala, was a living legend. And he continues to serve the madhab with everything that he has done as certainly a legend within the scope of our study. He had many students that came from around the world, including the lands of Sham, Jerusalem, Ba'al, you should recognize al-Ba'ali here, Hijaz, and Najd. And they went on to be leaders. Many of them went on to be leaders as well, including Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Ali al-Khalwati, who authored a work of marginalia for Muntaha al-Iradat. Sheikh al-Khalwati died in 1088 Hijra calendar. Also Sheikh Yusuf ibn Yahya ibn Mar'i al-Karmi, who authored over 80 works, including Dalil al-Talib, which you may recognize that name. It's also a book of fiqh, kind of almost similar in terms of its length to Umdatul Talib. And he also authored Aqawil al-Thiqat, which is a book on Hanbali doctrine. It's quite a dense book, but very, very important book when it comes to learning about the doctrine of the Hanabila. And Sheikh Yusuf al-Karmi passed away in 1033 of the Hijra calendar. The great Imam Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, he also authored many works which have been of fundamental service to the Hanbali school. And these include, and I'm gonna list them in chronological order. And there's a reason for this, is understanding the chronological order of his works. You can understand kind of the nature of his conclusions over time and see the status of the book that we will be studying from him in greater detail. So first was the marginalia, and these are known as al-Hashiyah. Al-Hashiyah or al-Hawashi. Hashiyah is marginalia, basically like making annotations and footnotes. He wrote marginalia for al-Muntaha, and he completed that in the year 1036. And then he went on to write marginalia for al-Iqna'a, and he completed that in 1040. So here you can see he serviced both Muntaha and al-Iqna'a, these two titles I mentioned before, which kind of serve as the canon of the madhab. He went on after that and wrote al-Rawd al-Murbi' in 1043. He completed that, and that was an explanation of Zad al-Mustaqni'. Al-Rawd al-Murbi' is a kind of more intermediate level textbook to study the Hanbali school of law. It's a very, very popular, very famous book, not only because of the author Mansur ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, but more so perhaps because of the author of Zad al-Mustaqni' al-Hajjawi, rahimahumullah jami'an. After that, he went on and he authored Kashaf al-Qina'a in 1045, which is basically an explanation of al-Iqna'a. So he did a marginalia, and then almost 5 years later completed an explanation, an entire explanation. And then after that, he wrote al-Manih al-Shafiyat fi Sharh al-Mufradat, and this was completed in 1047 Hijra calendar. And this was a poem that he explained, which highlights the unique positions of the Hanbali school. And these unique positions of the Hanbali school are what sets the school apart from the other three madhahib, the Hanafis, the Malikis, and the Shafi'is in particular there. And kind of the unique positions or mufradat help a person understand the nature of the Hanbali jurisprudence. It gives them a good understanding and kind of molds their thinking into that of one who is Hanbali at the core, understanding how they arrived at these unique conclusions and positions. That was done in 1047, as it says. Then he wrote Daqa'iq ul Nuha li Sharh al-Muntaha. This was completed in 1049 of the Hijra calendar. And then finally, he wrote Umdatul Talib in 1050 of the Hijra calendar. Umdatul Talib, which is the textbook that we're going to be looking at. And here you can see, after a life of authorship, research, authorship, writing marginalia, writing explanations, addressing issues of mufradat, unique positions. Then he writes kind of at the end of his life, because he passes away in 1051. So in 1050, in the last year, basically full year of his life, he authored this textbook. And this was kind of like his final conclusions. And so, for that reason, one of the great imams and experts of the school, Ibn Badran, he said that the Hanbali instructor's religious duty was to select either Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat or Umdatul Talib. He says Al-Umda, which is the mainstay by Sheikh Mansur, as the manual to teach novice pupils. So this particular textbook, Umdatul Talib, is considered by some a golden standard among only a few other textbooks that you would really want to begin with. The text represents al-Buhuti's final conclusions and is one of the most accurate texts of its size in accordance with the official position of the Hanbali school. That's another thing to keep in mind when you're selecting a book to study as a beginner, or we may consider like above beginner, kind of like beginner intermediate level. That you want to find a book of the Hanbali school that is most in accordance with its official canon. And to my knowledge, Umdatul Talib is right up there at the top. Imam al-Buhuti only addresses a few issues in a manner which one could argue that this is not completely in line, and I think that those are just a handful, as opposed to another textbook like Zad al-Mustaqni', for example, where there are numerous different conclusions that the author arrives at, which contradict in some form or fashion the madhab itself, the mu'tamid. After a life of instruction and authorship, Sheikh Mansur fell ill and passed away in Egypt on a Friday, and this was around Duha, like mid-morning. This is the 10th of Rabi' Thani in the year of 1051 of the Hijra calendar. Jazakallah khair.